Okay, welcome to session 10, part D. Um, in this, let's see, for session 10, I think I'm going to do one more topic from chapter 7, and then in part E, I'm going to do a couple homework questions. Then I'll leave for session 11. I'm going to talk about the futures markets. I'm going to explain that concept, do a few more homework problems. But that will all be session 11. Session D. Uh, One more topic I want to explain. This is the notion of a residual claimant. Okay. So a residual claimant is the person or organization who gets the difference between revenue and costs. Okay, this means profit. This is the one who pockets, who earns the profits. Once again, the residual claimant is the person or organization who gets the difference between revenue and costs. Okay. So what this means is if there are profits, this is the one who pockets the profits, and it also means if there's a loss, if the revenue is less than the cost, this is the person who must pay those losses. Okay. Now, usually we think in a private business, the residual claimant is the owner. Okay. But meanwhile, there's some organizations or some businesses where it might not make sense to say there's a residual claimant. Lots of government organizations, there is no residual claimant. Something like the post office. So if they make extra revenue, there's not one person who pockets the money. Or if there's some way to decrease costs in the postal service, there's not a person who's going to pocket that money. You could say the government, but even there, it's not clear. That would really go into the general revenue of the government, and it's the Treasury Department who gets all those. It's really not a person who gets to take home that extra money, either from extra revenue or cost saved. The same thing happens with a nonprofit organization. If a nonprofit does something to increase its revenue or decrease its costs, there's generally not a person who gets to pocket that money, that extra revenue or that saved costs. And as a consequence, in the government organizations and in the nonprofits, there's there's not as much incentive. There's not one person who has the incentive to try to increase revenue or to decrease costs. Now remember, one part about increasing revenue, one way to increase revenue is to make your customers happy. You do something that increases the quality of your product. You do something to be more polite to your customers. You do something to um, try to advertise more to customers. If there's no residual claimant, often you won't see that. No one has an incentive to try to get those extra customers and to try to be um, to make the customer happy. Same thing with costs. If with a government organization or a nonprofit, there's not a residual claimant. Often there's no incentive to decrease those costs. So here's an idea. So if we go back to that piano lessons example, suppose this was a nonprofit that ran this piano lessons. Suppose that, as before, this piano lesson organization is getting $5,000 in revenue, paying $2,000 in rent, paying $2,000 in wage. Well, if it's a nonprofit, they would actually have to decrease the revenue. They're not supposed, by law, they're not supposed to make a profit, so they would. First thing they have to do is lower their price. So you'd say maybe that's good. Maybe this is good for the customer. They would have to lower the price to $4,500. So they're making zero profits. Now, suppose an opportunity arises where there's another piano teacher who, say, is a recent immigrant, who's very hardworking and wanting to get ahead, and that person says, look, I can teach piano if someone would just give me a job. They come up to the manager of this nonprofit and say, hey, look, I'll do the wage for less. I'll do it for 1,500. Okay, so I will save you $1,000 in your costs. Well, if you're the manager of that nonprofit, you would say, what do I care? I don't get I don't get to pocket that savings. By law, all that would happen is I'd have to decrease my price. I don't earn that. So suppose I'm the manager, and suppose I'm currently hiring my neighbor's kid or something, or my nephew, or some other friend who's the piano teacher. I would say, no, I'm going to keep the current piano teacher. I don't care about saving $1,000. Okay, that's maybe one problem with not having a residual claimant. The other possible problem is, suppose there was some way that you could make the studio where you practice piano shiny and new, and make people be extra friendly to customers. And if you could do that, you could increase the revenue from 4,500 to 5,500. You'd say that'd be an extra $1,000. If I was the owner of that business, I would say that's an extra $1,000 I get to keep. Well, if you're the manager of a nonprofit, you'd say, what do I care? That extra $1,000 actually, that doesn't help me at all. By law, I'm supposed to decrease my price even more. So we would say sometimes that's a problem. If there is no residual claimant, no one has the incentive to increase revenue, and therefore no one has the incentive to make customers happy, nor do you have an incentive to decrease costs and do things like hire a worker who's more hardworking and hungrier and more motivated than your current workers. So it can be a problem when there is no residual claimant. Okay, so that's the final point for part D. See in part E, where I'll do a couple homework questions.